The first drive I ever worked on was a 27 megabyte mainframe drive. So they've been around a long time. I'm going to sit here. Am I working this or are you?
What? No, you, because I'm going to give you power of yes.
There, that's what I didn't have.
3 o'clock position advances.
Yep.
9 o'clock is backwards. That's your laser.
Okay, excellent.
Have your menu, anyway, it sets you.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about disk drives, and since I only have 30 minutes,
Keep talking.
I'm not going to spend a lot of time telling you stories about me that you don't want to hear anyway. They're actually probably better than anything else I have to say, but still. How many in this room have actually had a failure of a storage device of some kind? That's a higher number than I was expecting. Okay, so the real question is, did you have any warning that it was going to happen? I'm not seeing, no one's confirming that. Once. How much warning?
Enough to get it replaced.
Okay, that's a good sign. So my real question is, would you like to know when it's going to happen? Because it turns out, once again, technology has saved us, and for the most part, the vendor marketplace has kind of chosen to ignore what's going on. So let's talk about what these devices are. Okay, we've got spinning hard drives that are both internal and external. You've got USB attached, you've got all kinds of stuff, and you've got various flavors of other things. And it turns out, really, there's only 2 kinds of data up there right now. You've got a mechanical drive, that's the older style that we're all used to, and the modern solid-state devices, which turn out to actually be probably 30 years ago, was their origins, because I remember working with them back when they called them bubble memory, a term probably nobody's even heard of. But really what it comes down to is that bottom line right there. All of these devices have firmware in them. There's a card, there's literally a computer inside the storage device that helps manage the storage device. It's completely dedicated to that. The good news is we don't have to install Windows on it, so therefore it can't break. The better news is, as long as there's power to the device, it's working just fine. So everything with firmware, okay? That's what lies behind this. So these are some statistics that I stole from a cloud storage vendor out there. And I did that because they've been doing this for a while. So they've been collecting detailed statistics since 2011. They currently have about 60,000 spinning drives right now, built-in storage pods. I could give you a commercial about them, but I won't bother. The thing that I like is they don't have a vested interest in anything except helping themselves survive the problems they have with their own disk drives. So what they determined is AFR, which they term to be annual failure rate, is in this case 5.1% at 18 months. So out of any 100 people, and I don't know what the count in this room, probably about 40. So you imagine, 2.5 times this room, 5 people out of that room are going to lose a drive in 18 months. Okay, you can see what happens after 3 years, and it turns out to get worse after that. And one thing that I actually liked in stumbling across this was spending more money on the more expensive disk drives didn't necessarily get you any good return. So a consumer quality drive is certainly as good as the stuff that they charge more for what they call enterprise drives for large corporations, which can cost $100 more than a retail drive. So a lot more money, no real value. So here's the new standard. Solid state devices, this is what we're all dealing with. The great thing about them is they are way faster, okay? A lot quicker, so you can plug a solid state device into an older machine, and that machine will perform a lot better than it used to, just for that reason, without weekly, monthly, yearly runs of trying to compress and reallocate your drive, squeeze that drive space down, so you don't have to deal with any of that issue anymore. But they do have one disadvantage, according to the same storage company. Spinning drives, when they fail, they kind of fail like a tire going flat. Whereas all of a sudden things don't feel right, but you got a little bit of time before it goes completely flat, usually. I'm not dealing with blowouts at the moment, just dealing with a slow leak. The SSD devices, on the other hand, tend to fail immediately. Once they fail, they're gone and you're not getting them back. There's no way to recover data. You can't send it off typically to a data storage company where they can remount the platters in something else and get your data off. So although it's a good news thing, there's a bad news. When it dies, it really dies. There is something up here called write cycle exhaustion. And I want to mention it simply because the bad news is that it's a guarantee that every one of your SSD devices will eventually fail. But that's like saying every car in the world is eventually going to die, because it's true. It's automatically true. But in this case, it's programmed into the way the device is defined, or the way the device is built. In that roughly about an average right now of about 19 years of writing data, and it will get tired, and it won't be able to write data reliably anymore. The good news about 19 years is if any of us have a computer that lasts 19 years, I guarantee you Windows will have destroyed our data long before that happens. So we're probably in pretty good shape. So I really throw that out there to help you understand if somebody says, hey, all solid state devices are eventually going to die, you can say, yeah, but I'm probably going to outlive them. Okay, so I'm not worried too much about that. It does exist. So it's, again, it's a sort of a good news, bad news. But this is the thing I really liked. Okay, just to know the fact that once that device starts to fail, it's going to go very quickly and there's not much you can do about it. However, the solution is this thing called SMART. And I mentioned all these storage devices have firmware built into them. That's where the SMART code is running. So the good news is there's a little computer inside your storage device that's doing a lot of work for you. The sort of bad news side of that is the code that's in there was written by the vendor. So all vendors, you know what happens when they have a standard, right? You have this device that you can see right here. We can all see the same thing, but everybody's perspective of it is slightly different. And so everybody's ability to write code to that standard, for some people it's going to look like a globe, for some people it's going to look like a cube. So you get some variance in the way the vendors do things. It's unfortunate, but it's part and parcel of being human. The good news is it's there, okay, and we can make use of it. So what I'm looking for is a tool that's going to help me make sense out of all that. There are a handful of tools out there that actually do this stuff, and you probably have heard some of the folks I know I was talking with you earlier are aware of the existence of this thing called SMART. The question is, how are we able to leverage the data that is being collected for us? And most of the tools that are out there are typical geek tools. If you're a Linux system administrator, you'll love most of what you find. For the real world folks, or for the folks who basically say, look, I just want it to work. I don't want to become an expert at something else. I just want it to work, okay? This is the tool that I stumbled into probably almost 3 years ago now. And courtesy of mentioning it to a friend who happens to be in the audience today, earlier this year, who tripped over it, as I recommended, he kind of tripped around it for a while and said, hey, this is really cool. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about it. One of the things I like about it is, for those of us who have old machines here, this thing will actually run on Windows NT. And it'll run on everything but I think 95, 3, and 3.1. It runs, because it doesn't use Microsoft.NET, it doesn't use Java, it doesn't use any built-in libraries, redistributable libraries. It's all self-contained. All the code comes from there. And so it runs on everything, including, in fact, there are free versions for Linux and DOS if you actually really care about those. One of the things I care about as a uber geek is there's a portable version too. So portable is nice. You walk around with the USB key, plug it into the machine, test out the drive, and walk away. Don't use a license. So I'm just going to give you a quick tour of it. Installation is pretty standard. If you've installed anything, you can install this. It's not a problem. Hopefully everybody here is running with Windows security account elevation required. So when you go to do the install, it's going to ask you, should this program be allowed to install here? If you're not getting that prompt that says yes or no, please ask somebody to set that up for you and show you how to use it, because it's the one thing that'll save you from those website drive-bys that want to install stuff on your machine that you won't like, as opposed to the ones that merely tell you they did something. Okay, it's sneaky, but they haven't done any damage yet. So as he says, close the browser, move on, you're probably okay. But the security account elevation trick that makes software request your permission can't be bypassed unless you turn it off. So get past the install, and the next thing this thing is going to do is going to show up with a picture of your drive. It's a very simple picture. This area right here focuses on the physical disks that it sees attached to your machine. Those can be internally installed, they can be externally connected via USB, they can be stuck into a memory card slot. Whatever it sees, it will identify and let you know. It will also identify, in the case of the physical drives, logical drives. Okay, so this here you see C and E, logical drives, and the utilization associated with those two. Does that help? Well, that's a shame. Well, I apologize for that, but no. I apologize that I become more clear in their eyes. Believe me, it was probably better when I was just a fuzzy blob. But that's okay. So at any rate, back to this. This is the section I kind of want you to pay attention to, because this is already a little bit geeky, but not too bad, because basically I can deal with a simple list. I can deal with this area that I'm going to talk about in a second, and I can deal with this chart, okay? It's measuring health, and you can see in this particular case, that particular drive has come up with 100% the entire time. So in this case, a flat line is a good thing. I don't know if I'll say that too many years from now, but still. So we have this changing health, which hasn't changed. Here's a close-up view of this, where you can see now that really what it's saying is performance from what it detects, better use of the word, is excellent, health is excellent, and it just simply says the hard disk status is perfect. Problematic or weak sectors were not found, and there are no spin-up or data transfer errors, no actions needed. Okay, that's a nice succinct summary. You will see this window by default, this entire window here, by default, every time you boot, you'll close it and it'll disappear. You won't see it again. And you can even turn that off if you find that annoying, okay? But it's just a reminder, hey, I'm here, I'm doing this stuff, and it gets better from here, okay? I'll give you a quick tour of a couple of the other tabs. You'll notice there were tabs across the top. We started on the overview tab. So here's the temperature tab. Just gonna give you a quick peek at what's happening. And once again, for all of the data that it has been able to collect back to the date you installed it, it'll chart it, storing that in a series of flat file databases on the machine. So I can go back, in my case, back to the date of the original installation, and I can see what were the temperature variations, which is kind of interesting because it turned out the hottest period of my own drive, and this actually was taken from my own system, happened to be a day when I'd forgotten to turn off the heat and went out on a warm day. And my loft office got its usual toastiness, which of course affects the drive. So, okay, the room gets warm, the drive gets warm. That makes sense. It's a laptop, but I leave it on all the time, and it tends to get a little bit hot. Next tab, okay? So we have the smart tab that you spoke of. So all of the smart metrics that it's monitoring, and I believe there's something in the vicinity of 100. It's an open list, and so you won't see these numbers being consecutive. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 9. I think some of the metrics they've invented in the past have ultimately become disused, so they just kind of drop them out of the list. I'm okay with that because it tells me which ones they think are important. It gives me the opportunity to give some explanation about what they are. And one of the features that is true of this product that's not true of anything else, it's not likely you're going to need to adjust them. But if you find something that's out of whack, and the most common one that the vendor suggests is temperature. If you think the temperature of your drive is reading either hot or cold, you can simply tweak it by a couple of degrees one way or the other until you feel it's actually correct. And then you'll see, and if you have a laser thermometer and can really check the temperature of the drive, that'll solve that problem completely. But you can guarantee that what you're getting is accurate data. If you don't want to look here, don't. It's a lot, even for the geeks. Okay, information tab. How many times have you had to go back and say, what is it that I have installed? What vendor did it come from? There is more information in this list than you'll find in the average community phone book. Okay, and it's extremely useful because there's also links to the vendor websites in some of those cases where you can actually pull that up and go, oh, click, oh, great. Now I know exactly what model my drive is. Other information, there's just a lot there. This is actually kind of nice, the performance tab, okay? Simply because if you're doing something and you really want to see what the impact is, this is as good as if you don't want to go into Windows Performance Monitor, some other tools. I don't know how familiar anyone here is with Task Manager. Windows 10 Task Manager is actually not bad because it contains a picture that's going to show you a consumer's eye view. You know, show me nice, clear pictures of CPU, disk, memory, and network utilization, just charts, so I can kind of see what's going on. If you don't know what Task Manager looks like, I urge you to take a peek at it at some point in time. If you want to know a little bit more, the Performance tab here will give you real-time disk activity and transfer rate, so you can actually see what's going on. Again, if you don't care about this, don't worry about it. Now, the significance from my part is, once I install this product, what am I really going to do with it? The truth is, I'm going to configure a couple of things with it. It's going to take me 5 minutes, maybe 10. And then I'm going to ignore it forever because its job is to tell me what it wants me to know. I'm not spending my time staring at it, trying to figure out, is it good, is it good, is it good, is it good? I'm going to go away from this and just forget about it. But you need to configure a couple of quick things first. Okay, obviously, international products, so if language is an issue, if you prefer an alternate language, it's available. Units, basically Celsius or Fahrenheit, whichever you prefer. I've actually found that I prefer Celsius because it keeps exercising my mind about the translation between the two. So that when I talk to my friends in Europe or South America or wherever else around the world, I at least have some idea of it. When they say it's 40 degrees outside, they go, wow, that's hot, which it turns out it is. But sound and display options. Do I want an alarm? Do I want a display alarm? Okay, message settings, display on screen. And if you're not going to use email, which I'll talk about in a second, turn it off. Okay, because in this case, it's not going to do anything for you. Disk control. There's an option on there to modify the default disk icons, and that doesn't do anything major, but it turns out Windows Explorer gives you a nice representation of the free space available on your drives, just as an icon. And other than that, you won't even notice it, but it's kind of nice to see green, yellow, red from a free space filling up perspective without having to do anything major to get it. And I'm going to say, do this one time, because what this actually does, it won't send anything yet, but it's going to, or I should say the update test report part won't. It'll just generate a test report which contains a report on all the drives it finds, and it'll save that. If you ever need to contact the vendor for support, you won't have to worry about running it again. So these are the options that you should set after you do the install. That's all. You don't have to mess with any of the rest of them. And by the way, the option list, all options ultimately pop up the same window, and it's just a question of which one you click on. This one here happens to be the alerts tab, as you can see there. Okay, so it's a fairly simplified setup. And two options that you might want to consider depending upon what you're doing. Okay, if you don't use email, if you don't want to use email, that's fine. If you do, set this up the same way you've set up your email client, Thunderbird, Outlook, Microsoft Mail, whatever you've done. It's a one-time setup. And if you recall the alerts box that you saw, and I'm going back a slide, okay, where you can say, do I want to send alerts on any of these things? The email setup will actually send you an email for anything it finds. I actually find this useful for a couple of reasons, one of which is, like most people, I do remote support for members of my family. So now I get a report about an issue before the person can call and tell me, I think something's going on with my drive. Okay, and so I actually like that. The second thing I'll mention, and this goes back to this SSD drive failure. It's what he calls, what Janos, the developer of this product, calls a panic backup. I've detected something going on that says, oh my gosh, I think this drive is going to fail. Now for spinning mechanical drives, that usually takes weeks. But for an SSD or flash device of any kind, it can happen fairly quickly. So what this does is it allows you to go through a couple of steps I've outlined here to define a project, to plug that project into panic backup, and then go back and configure alerts to do a panic backup. So if you have a backup device connected to your machine, and perhaps it runs on a scheduled basis anyway, once it does the panic backup, you get an immediate backup. Now that backup can launch your own. In my case, I actually use a version of Xcopy, which for the folks who've been around a while, they're going to laugh. I've had 15 different backup products. In the end, I don't trust any of them because they're all proprietary. But you know what? When it copies my data, I know I can always get it back. So you can use your own command line to copy it. You can use Acronis. You can use whatever backup product you currently have installed. Set up the command line command to do the panic backup. Target the backup device that you have. And if HD Sentinel detects an issue, that'll happen for you. You don't have to be there. And it will send you an email. So that's what I like. When I say, we're going to install this thing and we're going to forget about it. And in fact, I've given you a summary slide here. It kind of encapsulates a lot of what I just said. I won't bore you with reading it, but this is the only part of HD Sentinel I typically see. That's the icon that sits in my tray. It says my primary drive is spinning at 34 degrees. It's happy, it's healthy. And other than that, I never see anything unless I boot and that window comes up and I go, yeah, it says, okay, close it. I'm done. That's what I like. The solution exists. It's painless. I know it has me covered in a way that I didn't before because it's going to predict these failures long before they happen in the case of a mechanical disk. and fairly quickly before they happen in the case of a solid state one. We all know there are no guarantees, but I think it's a significant improvement over what we have today. Okay? And I want to point out a couple of things. I mentioned I have a colleague in the audience here today. Everybody heard the name Mr. Gabe Goldberg. I've been fortunate enough to be working with and a friend of for more years now that I can even remember. Shows you how bad my memory is getting. And it was suggesting this product to Gabe that basically resulted in A, this talk today, and B, this thing, a 40% discount off the family license. Now, I bought my family license almost 3 years ago because I've got multiple machines in my house, and a 5 license pack for me made perfect sense. But courtesy of Mr. Goldberg, what we have is 40% off the family license price of $53. Okay, so your cost is $32, $6 and change per computer, and I'm going to mention this, shareable with family and friends. Because the gentleman who runs this company, he's perfectly fine with you buy a 5 license pack, you give them to whoever you want. As long as you get 5, that's all that matters. So we have at least one on the West Coast and another one on the East Coast that I know are using your licenses. All mine are in my house, but so that's a pretty good deal. For $6 and change per machine, I don't think you can beat that. In order to get that, by the way, you do need to follow this link, and there is a coupon code found on that page. Extra credit to anybody who can tell me the origin of the coupon code if and when you find it. I think Mr. Gabe will buy you a cup of coffee, and I'll reimburse him. Yeah, I'll reimburse him, don't worry. So I did want to acknowledge Gabe because I think it's one of the few products, and I've spent about half of a very long career in the vendor space as well as being on the user side. So I know what it's like to be both sides. The vendor himself is just one of the nicest people I've met. One of the fairest people I've met, puts out a quality product and is very concerned if anyone has an issue with it. And again, you know Gabe, you'll trust his word more than mine, but ask him sometime, ask him at the break. So I refer to him simply that, an exemplary vendor in every way. Some references for those people who need trouble, or I should say who need assistance sleeping. And I'd like to say thank you and ask if there are any questions. Yes, sir.
One question. Question. Nope, I forgot to push button.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. One question. Sometimes hard drives will experience a sector failure, and you can cross out the sector and update the directory, and the drive keeps going.
Well, that's a very
Century
old technology. These days, there's no modern drives now that should require you to do that.
Okay.
Okay.
That's interesting. Second, I'll relate a story very quickly. I recently ran a diagnostic. I can't remember if it was a Windows diagnostic or a Dell diagnostic on my old 435, and it said this hard drive is about to fail. So I cloned it using Macrium, replaced it with a new drive, and made that the secondary drive. But then I found that Seagate has a program which you can download from Seagate website. It's a standalone program. I ran a fast scan, which did not fix the hard drive. And then I ran a slow scan, which took hours, after which the hard drive seemed to be okay in the sense it passed the tests. So I don't know if that's relevant to what you're talking about, but at least it eliminated the emergency condition. And some vendors do have these custom standalone programs which you can use to examine their drives and their drives only.
Depending upon the drive that you have, and there is a full list on this vendor's website about what he supports, there is a surface test tool that's built into this that can actually trigger that. Because in the old days, you literally had to hand edit the sector table in the BIOS of the machine to say, don't use these sectors because I know they're bad. And you'd see grease pencil writing on the outside label. Run length limited comes to mind, and extra credit for anybody who remembers RLL drives. Okay, and I see some confused looks on a couple of people. I told you I've been around a while. Modern firmware takes care of all that inside the drive, so you shouldn't have to deal with that. If the drive detects a number of consecutive write errors to the same sector, it'll mark the sector internally in the firmware as unusable and simply shift the space to another, the data to another space. Now, what most of us don't know is if you imagine this entire wall was full of like hotel mailboxes, okay, the formatted capacity of your drive only occupies about 80 or 90% of that space. There's a bunch of open mailboxes that aren't being used. as it finds space on your physical disks where the media goes bad in some way, shape, or form, it simply marks that box as unusable, copies the data to an open box, and you'll never know the difference because once again, the drive firmware takes care of remapping all that for you. So drives are not perfect. They're just well managed, okay, underneath the covers. That's how it actually works. SSD is really not much different. If a particular cell starts to fail, the firmware in the drive will simply say, stop using that cell. Or in this case, what you call write fatigue or exhaustion. Once a cell has had enough write operations done to it, it's no longer capable of storing the data in a stable fashion. And again, the firmware will try to keep up with that. Eventually, the drive will just die because it runs out of space. Did I answer your question? Okay.
Any more? Letty?
With respect to the first screenshot that you showed, so if I install this product, you said you are perfect, no problems. What if you're not perfect?
Start asking questions. If you have any question at all about the status of things, one of the things you should do probably right after doing the installation, shame on me for not mentioning this, is run a drive test. Whatever the results are that you're seeing, if you're not happy, that send test report, you're welcome to send that off to the vendor and he will give you a recommendation on what he thinks you should do. Now, if something comes back in your mailbox catches fire, it's probably a clue that you should do something about replacing it. But yeah, that's not a good sign. Although, Gabe, if I remember correctly, Dave had a problem with his that initially looked like his drive was not healthy. And with some tweaks, I believe that was corrected. Is that what you recall?
I'm not sure what time frame you're talking about. For many, many years ago,
Dave Gomberg, just a few months ago. Okay.
I'm not sure what you're...
When he installed HD Sentinel for the first time on one of your licenses, I recall seeing a communication from him that indicated that he had something around a 70%. Yeah, from Dave. 70%, something in that range. It wasn't completely healthy.
Yeah, and my experience when you asked who found out about problems before they occurred was years ago. I was running a Symantec tool that had a nice cheerful green icon in the notification area, and one day it wasn't cheerful green, it was alarming yellow, and it was telling me the drive was failing, and basically it was using the smart information exactly this did. So it was a software window from the secrets that the drive normally keeps out to me where I was told about it in time to do something about it.
Just a pass-fail, that's all. Okay.
An early warning that incipient failure.
Have you had any experience with this product in solid-state drives?
I have tested it on a number of USB drives that I have, and I mean solid-state. Seems to be fine. I actually am running it on my wife's laptop, which has a 512 gigabyte SSD drive in it. Seems to work fine. Yes. I don't know how it responds. Well, remember, what he's reporting is what the firmware has recorded. And that's actually up to how the vendor manages the drive internally. So there's no way we're ever going to get a control into that, but at least we have a window. I do want to make one quick comment about that. I know I'm over time by a minute or two. A reference to solid-state drives. In the spinning drive days, when running a drive test, they would always ask you to run a read-write test, okay? And the requirement was, can I write data and read it back and guarantee that the data I got back was exactly what I wrote? That makes perfect sense. Don't do that on a solid-state drive, because every cell on a solid-state drive has a fixed number of times it can write data to it. And so what you're doing is you're -1, -1, -1 every time you do it. However, if you run the extensive tests that are read-only, what you're going to do is you're going to cause the drive to reevaluate the state of all those cells. And the drive firmware will probably trip over the fact that it's having a problem and reallocate a sector, okay? But so running a write test on an SSE device is basically shortening its life. Running a read test may actually improve the results of things. Yes, sir.
Paul, I probably missed it, but this will be available on the website?
Yes, it is. It's the presentation, I've already provided it. You have a USB key that has the PDF there for everyone with clickable links and all that stuff. Yes, sir.
Two things. One, if you could put the coupon HTTP address back up. And secondly, are all drives on cell phones SSD?
all cell phones are SSD drives because they are by definition solid state memory, not spinning disk. No, actually, yeah, you did. The very first one, keep going. Right after this thing. Okay. Which way are we going? Oh, we're going, okay, keep going. And pass through configurations, yep. One more, right there. Again, this will be available on the website, so you can track it down. Mr. Howard knows exactly.
This will be on our recent meetings page, along with a review that Gabe did of the product, as well as Ray's presentation. So they'll both be there, and we may extract the data about how to get the discount.
The presentation is in PDF form, and those links are clickable. Mr. Gabe's review is in the PATACS org site, but in PDF form. And I don't know if it includes the link on the top. So the APCUG link at the top actually does contain a page with the coupon code and the clickable link that will get you to it, the purchase. So,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you, Ray.